Warning: All Things Crime is a true crime production that may contain violent or disturbing material. Viewer or listener discretion is advised. Hey guys, part two of my discussion with Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith, and talking about not only policing in the United States right now, but some of the chaos that's being caused by the defunding and everything else. So enjoy.
American law enforcement ends up killing about 8 to 15 unarmed people a year. Now, most of those people were trying to kill a cop with either take the cop's gun, obtaining a weapon that they didn't have, running us over with a car. It's a very rare occurrence. And that's one of the things that again, we call leadership into task, is we've got to fight that false narrative that American law enforcement officers are out there hunting down young unarmed black men to murder. It's just not happening. And Black Lives Matter and Antifa will try to convince you that it is. And they talk about this epidemic of black people being killed by the police, and that's just false.
Yeah, and it's sad because honestly, a really amazing profession and full of really good people. I know a lot of cops, and they are all good people. I'm sure, like I said, I haven't met enough yet. It's just a matter of time, but I haven't met enough that I've actually met somebody that I just look at him and I'm like, that is just not a good dude. And
Right.
he needs to be taken out. You know, the numbers are they just don't pan out. And so, yes, I admit, every time I see those red and blue lights behind me and I knew that I was speeding, it is a bad day. and you know, I know that ultimately I'll probably just get a ticket, but that cop doesn't know that.
Right.
And when I see him walking up on the passenger side and he's got his hand on the hilt of his weapon, and I'm like, you know what? That guy, he has to be careful. He wants to go home to his family just like I do. And yet he runs risks that most of us can't even comprehend.
Right.
Even being in the military, I never actually had to deploy to anywhere. And so it was just bizarre the way my career fell in between wars. A little FYI for you. I arrived at the 101st Airborne Division, which I'm sure you know is a rapid deployment division.
Yeah.
I arrived there probably 4 or 5 months after they got back from the first Gulf War. And so somehow my career, just as it was going, I ended up right after the first Gulf War. And then I was in training divisions and training guys that were going off to the second one. Anyways, it's just a weird time that I never had to deploy. But the bottom line is, and my point, I'll eventually get to my point. You know, that's one of the things that we do, right? The point is that you have to rise to the moment. And cops, for the most part, are under that kind of almost wartime like pressure all the time.
Yeah.
And they have no idea. This guy that they're pulling over to for a broken light or a speeding ticket, they have no idea if that person has a weapon in the car. They have no idea if that person is, who knows, you know, and so they have to treat everybody as if they are an extreme threat until they've ascertained that they're not. You can't name another profession that is like that.
Exactly. We just had a police officer killed in, I believe it was Virginia, who just made a routine, quote unquote, traffic stop. And he didn't even get the door open of his patrol car to get out and go talk to the driver. And the driver popped out, shot, and killed him.
Wow.
And this is the reality of law enforcement. And that's what, when we talk about the depolicing and reimagining policing and all that, you hear a lot of talk in some large urban areas. Let's send in social workers to a lot of these situations instead of police officers. Well, that's terrific, except that so many times when a law enforcement officer is attacked, they went to something as innocuous as a 911 hang-up call or a well-being check. And in these mental health situations, when people have called, very often it's family members who've called 911 and said, my family member is having a mental health episode, et cetera, they end up obtaining a weapon, this and that. To send unarmed social workers into those situations is so deadly for the social workers. It's unthinkable. And it's sad when law enforcement has to use force against somebody who is on drugs or is mentally ill. But we're the ones that unfortunately are tasked with that. And it would be great if every patrol cop in this country could have a licensed social worker riding along with them. I think that would be awesome. Nobody wants to pay for it.
And frankly, I dare say none of the social workers want to do that.
No, they're not suicidal.
No,
they want to help people in a situation that's safe for them. And I think that's what they deserve.
Oh, yes. And the interesting thing, again, going back to Dion Joseph, is, he works at Skid Row in LA. Mm-hmm. And so that alone should tell you the kind of situation that he's in every day. But his point was, you have to actually make sure that the chemical barrier in between you and that person, whether it's male or female, you make sure that chemical barrier, they can't even recognize that you're another human when they're on drugs and stuff like that. And so if they're in the middle of the street swinging a baseball bat or a chain or threatening other people, and maybe they have a knife or God forbid a gun, then social workers are not going to be able to handle that. And frankly, nobody in society should want them to handle that, because that's not what social workers are for.
Exactly. And unfortunately, law enforcement is tasked with, and that's the thing, people, like everybody likes to second guess us. There's lots of, I'm on Twitter, and there's lots of keyboard warriors on Twitter who like to attack police tactics and things like that. And it's like, cops have to know a little bit about a million different things to be able to do our job. So yes, we have to know about drugs. We have to know about mental illness. We have to know everything from de-escalation techniques to how to place a center mass shot with our pistol and a million things in between. I was a cop for 29 years. I delivered 2 babies while I was on the job. Fortunately, I knew how to do that. So there are so many things that police officers end up having to get involved in. And so we have to know a tiny bit about a lot of different things. And yet everything we do is criticized. And now, of course, everything we do is being videotaped, recorded. It's a lot of pressure. That's why when we were talking about Minneapolis, this is why Minneapolis is 200 police officers short right now, because they've had so many officers leave with post-traumatic stress issues. And we're seeing that look at NYPD. They have so many retirements that HR can't process them fast enough. And we have police officers leaving LA and Austin and Chicago. And so, exactly what you just said, it's these large urban areas that already had crime problems to begin with. Now they have police officers leaving, and they're either retiring, or a lot of them are leaving for places like where you live in Utah, or where I live in Arizona. They're fleeing and they're going to places who appreciate the police.
Even if it's a massive pay cut to move into an area that, the cost of living is a lot cheaper here than it would be in New York. And they're probably moving away from family, but to not get shot at all the time, to not get screamed at, I saw, even though a bucket of water getting dumped on a NYPD officer, it was probably even hot that day, so maybe it even felt good. That's not the point. The point is, that's an absolute huge show of disrespect. And the fact that that officer didn't react, he didn't know what was in that. He didn't know what was, that it might have been water in that bucket. What if that had been acid? You just never
What
know.
if it was urine, which happens all the time on a riot line?
Right. In fact, that friend of mine that's with Salt Lake PD was telling me that the night of the riots, shortly after, or the night after the George Floyd incident, they all rolled into that riot, and most of them didn't have riot gear, and there were 29 officers that were seriously hurt from that. And that's just in Salt Lake, and that wasn't even a major riot. Yeah, the number of injuries, like you said, the PTSD, the problems with the officers, it's really sad because, again, it's a noble profession, and these guys deserve our respect, not our ire. Now, the guy that had, that caused the whole George Floyd incident, yeah, I am fully supportive of him going to trial. And if there's enough evidence to convict him, then so be it. That's the way our justice system works. But for the rest of them, all the cops that are suffering from that one police officer's actions, that's just wrong. And like you said earlier, there's no other profession in the world that suffers the sins of the few.
Right. And what I want people to understand is, we have about 100 police officers a year are killed feloniously, where we are either shot or stabbed to death or run over by a car intentionally, things like that. We don't riot when someone kills one of our own. We work through the justice system to arrest them and bring them to trial. And if they end up attacking another police officer, we end up sometimes using deadly force. But we don't riot. We don't rail against the system. We don't bring up anyone's race. And we work within the system. And so, that's what needs to happen. And, it's just like we saw in Baltimore when the prosecutor there in the Freddie Gray case overcharged, arrested those officers that, she said were responsible for the death of Freddie Gray. The officers went to trial. All evidence was presented. And what do you know? They were all acquitted. And that's what's happening. I think that's what's going to happen in Atlanta and some of the other cases out there. There's one in Oklahoma City right now where these officers end up being investigated and then quickly overcharged with crimes that they didn't commit. Because a lot of people don't understand the justice system either. You talk about Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis. Why wasn't he? People want to know, why isn't he charged with first-degree murder? Because he didn't commit first-degree murder. You have to understand our justice system isn't law and order SVU. We have actual laws. A lot of people don't understand the way the justice system works. That each case has to be handled according to the law. So there are different degrees of murder in each state. It's different, and a lot of these overzealous prosecutors end up overcharging people. And I think we may see that in Minneapolis. There's a real good chance that Derek Chauvin won't get convicted of anything when all the evidence is presented, because George Floyd had a lot of health issues. The autopsy clearly shows that he was full of fentanyl, that he had terrible heart issues. So there were a lot of mitigating circumstances. And it's going to be interesting to watch. But like you said, whether he's convicted, Chauvin is convicted or not, the city's probably going to burn again.
Yeah, which again is sad because
Very.
The most marginalized people in that city are the ones that are going to suffer the most. It's not it's not going to be the city council people. They probably don't even live anywhere close to where the rioting will happen. And
exactly. Well, and that's the thing, that one of the things we've done at the National Police Association is we've gotten involved in Minneapolis, trying to advocate not just for the police department, but for the citizens. We filed amicus briefs, and because we've said these citizens are asking for help from the police department, the amount of service that they did in a year and a half ago. And businesses are failing, people are getting hurt. Carjackings are up almost 400% in Minneapolis.
Hmm.
Rape is up. Robbery is up. There are some robbery victims, businesses that are robbery victims in Minneapolis that get robbed 2 and 3 times a week by the same guy. So we finally decided, the National Police Association, we're going to get involved in this and advocate for the officers, but advocate for the community. And that's what policing is all about. We can go back to, the origins of law enforcement. Sir Robert Peel in England. The people are the police and the police are the people. We're supposed to be in this together. And that's one of the things that we're involved in. We're really all about not just police, but we're about the community.
That is one of the saddest things I think anybody has heard in a long time, is because getting rid of it just does not make any sense to me for anybody to think that society will continue to function in any semblance of normality based on having no police. I once had a person tell me that her house was safe because she was armed. So she wasn't worried about it and she didn't want the police around. I was frankly like, you know what? I don't think you fully understand the sheer fact that criminals know that police are out there. They may not know where they are, but they know they're out there. And that alone is a deterrent.
Yes.
And anybody with any kind of common sense understands that. You cannot have a vacancy in all law enforcement. Imagine the wild, wild west, as crazy as it was, with no sheriff.
Right. Right.
There's no law. The wild, wild west would once again reemerge in the United States, because when people know that there's no repercussions for their actions, then there's no limit to what some people, obviously, and the bad guys is obviously who we're referring to. But if they know there's no repercussions, which I think is that no bail thing.
Yeah.
If they know they can rob somebody, and especially like in San Francisco, they know to the dollar how much stuff they can steal, and that they'll never be prosecuted for it. And so they'll walk into a store, and I've heard, you've probably actually confirmed this, but I've heard of people walking into like stores with a calculator, adding up the stuff that they're going to steal, as long as they're under, I think it's like $980 or something like that. And they're adding it up on a calculator, and then they'll just walk out of the store.
And see, people will say, well, they're just trying to feed their children, this and that. They're stealing liquor and things like baby formula that they can sell. They're not stealing bread and milk. And they go in there, and again, it depends on the jurisdiction, where you can go in and steal a certain amount, and the police won't even take a report. And the police are not the ones making that decision. That right. is the city leadership who says, well, we're gonna call this, anything under $1,000, we're just gonna call that a petty crime, and we're not gonna take a report. In my home state of Illinois, they just passed they call it a law enforcement reform bill, but it's doing everything from eliminating cash bail to decriminalizing things that used to be felonies or high misdemeanors. And when you start doing that, what you're doing is really you're victimizing the community twice. And you're victimizing them once because, they're going to get things stolen from them or they're going to get hurt. And then you victimize them a second time by telling them, well, there's really nothing I can do about that. And that goes against the reason we become police officers, is because we want to help the community. For us to have to stand by and watch people in our community be victimized, and we have to stand there and not do anything about it, or we have to tell them, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about this, that chips away at our heart. And when we see that day after day after day, what happens is we end up getting out, because we just can't take it anymore. Nobody becomes a police officer. Nobody becomes a police officer to get rich. Believe me, none of us are rich. And nobody becomes a police officer because they want to hurt people. We become police officers because we want to help our community. We want to arrest the bad guy. We want to go out there and be the heroes. And so when we're not able to do that, it wears at us, and we end up getting out and going to do something else. And it's going to be a crisis in a lot of our urban areas eventually. And we're already seeing it in some areas. It really is.
Yeah.
We're having a recruiting and a retention crisis.
Well, as a business owner, I can tell you there's only so much that any business can absorb. And there's another fallacy out there, not just that, all police are bad. That narrative that's being pushed needs to be shut down. But the second narrative is that businesses can absorb any amount of loss. And these businesses, that some of them have been in their locations for decades. And so of course they don't want to move. They love their community, they love being there, they love providing whatever service they provide. But there's a limit to what they can absorb. And at some junction between the COVID shutdowns and riot losses and being now, especially if they're in an area that petty theft is not even prosecuted and they provide some kind of a consumer good I'm sorry, if I'm a business owner and I see somebody walk in with a calculator starting to add up the stuff that I know that they're just going to walk out of my store with, and there's nothing I can do about it, there's nothing the police will do about it because they can't. There's only so many times I could see that and not just say, I'm done.
Well, sure.
I'm gonna lock my doors. I'm gonna grab the inventory that I have, and I'm gonna load my truck, and I'm gonna go find some place where I can actually conduct business safely. And unfortunately, in the areas that we're talking about, San Francisco and places, there's a reason that Arizona and Utah and Idaho, Wyoming are being flooded with Californians.
Yep.
These people are coming out they're sick and tired of it. They can't even fathom living the way because that's no life. And if I can't do, as a business owner, I've been in business for a long time. And as a business owner, the thought of losing money month over month, you just can't do it. And especially small businesses, they operate on, if they have more than 2 or 3 months worth of ability to continue on without any kind of income or at a loss, then they're actually doing really good. Most of them can't afford 1 month. So some of these business owners, again, convenience stores or clothing shops, things like that, if they're in an urban area like that, yeah, they're going to eventually they will have no choice but to close shop or to respond as if they were police, which
Right.
then it gets ugly.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's a no-win situation for them. And this goes right back to the politicians that are making these policies and saying, look, it is your responsibility to establish a safe environment. Allow your police to provide a safe environment for me to conduct business. And if they weren't doing that, then either they need to suffer the repercussions of businesses leaving, which is happening en masse in California. Anybody that can leave is leaving.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah. And all my friends in Florida and everything, there's a reason that so many New York plates. I was just in Miami a few weeks ago, and I could not believe how many Massachusetts and New York license plates I saw.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it's not just because it's wintertime.
Exactly. And the problem is when these business owners leave these communities, then we're left with, you'll hear a lot when we talk about poor communities that there are retail deserts and food deserts and things. That's because these business owners, if you can't make a profit, and then, like you said, small business, their margin is already slim to begin with. If they can't protect their businesses and the police can't help them protect their businesses, why would they stay in these areas where, crime is almost encouraged?